This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Okay. Well, they say poets are born and not made, but I think that's not right. They're born and made. So there has to be some part of your mind that is in love with language that you're sort of born with. Mm-hmm. But then you have to study the craft and read all the poetry that is out there. I read 10 pages every morning. That's 3,000 pages a year. That's 30,000 pages in 10 years. And so on. That's a lot of poetry. Poetry is dense. So I've read almost all the great poetry ever written and studied it. So a poet is born and made. And what happened was that I was writing poetry all along and sticking it away in drawers and things when I was a child. And got into high school, and we had an assignment to render an abstract painting in words, and I wrote a prose poem and turned it in, and it kind of rocked everybody's world. The teacher couldn't even believe it, and then called in officials from the school district, and I don't know, and had me recite it to them.
Wow.
And then afterward, he said, "What are you going to be?" And I said, "Theoretical physicist," on account of my idol was Albert Einstein. Mm-hmm. And he just laughed. He said, no, you're not. You're a poet." And it was like one of those Zen moments, he was actually laughing at theoretical physics as a life choice. And actually, I realized in a flash that I'd been writing poetry every day, for years, and loved like the works of William Shakespeare and so on. And I realized that I was a poet. And then I looked around, and I was in the accelerated classes in high school, and all of the accelerated students, they were all going to be mathematicians and scientists and engineers. And the reason why was that the government was encouraging them to do so in order to catch up or stay ahead of the Russians, our enemy, so-called.
Yeah.
And I like Russian poetry too.
Me too.
Boris Pasternak. And so I thought, what the heck? He said I'm a poet, and nobody else is going to be a poet in and all these kids. So I'll do it. Yeah, and it felt like a choice, but I know that I was already there. And then since then, I've been devoted to poetry. I wrote and studied for 17 years before I ever sent one poem to a literary journal.
Wow.
Because it wasn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
I knew what was good by what I read every morning. And until I reached that threshold, I wasn't going to bother the world with it. And I've lived a long time and written slowly but surely. So that you see that American Cycle is a 750-page epic poem, but it took 57 years to write.
It's dense.
Yeah.
Really
And about half of those years were spent in research on the subject matter of each of the 10 book-length poems. So I'm a poet. And then when it comes to songwriting, like in the Song to the Siren, that's my collected lyrics or selected lyrics. Hundreds of what are of songs I've written were excluded for not being good enough. These songs are poems that can be sung.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I conceived them. So that's why they can come out in a book of poetry. So Larry Beckett, poet, that you can just say that.
Where did you grow up, Larry?
In LA, different parts of LA.
So did you go to like Hollywood High School, or what high school did you go to?
Yeah, and you can tell that I'm from LA because the very first song in Song to the Siren is Los Angeles Riverbed.
Mm-hmm.
About my exploits as a rocket engineer in this vast channel, concrete channel where water never ran. It was a perfect place to launch rockets. They'd go hundreds of yards and you could go get them. And it was safe. Mm-hmm. In a manner of speaking. I don't know. My parents knew I was blowing things up, but yeah, I went to Loera High School in Anaheim.
Okay.
We were there while Disneyland was being built.
Wow.
Nice. Amazing. Do you feel like growing up in Los Angeles informed your poetry or the subject matter of your poetry at all?
Yes. Well, the thing is that it's a megalopolis, as they say, and so the bookstores have more books. They have William Blake, whereas if you go into a bookstore in some other kind of town, a small town, it might not have William Blake at all.
True.
And he's essential. So, and another thing about it is my parents made the really fatal mistake of giving me for Christmas one year when I was around 9, a build-it-yourself transistor radio.
Wow.
This is around 1956. Mm-hmm. And it had a crystal diode tuner and a single transistor and one mono headphone. And I'd say goodnight and crawl up in my bed and put my radio on, run by a battery. Mm-hmm. And I'd tune around, and there was the birth of rock and roll. And if I wasn't in love with music already, I was after that night. So so music itself is an informing principle for me. In poetry, the best poetry, the language itself has its own music, and I'm devoted to that music too. I don't consider full-fledged poems that don't pay attention to the music of the language, by which I mean the patterns of the vowels and the consonants, the rhythms of the lines. Just writing something in free verse that's from the heart or whatever, that's not enough. It has to take form, and that form is music. So falling in love with music, that's something I could easily do in LA. So does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think access has so much to do with it, and living in
Yeah.
a place that is so diverse culturally, it gives you the language that you're talking about is ambient. So when you're walking in the street or you go into a store,
Yeah.
you could hear 3 or 4 different languages that then becomes kind of the rhythm or the mood of that place. So I can see how
Yeah.
that would draw you out as a poet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You ready for the next one? Okay.
No, go.
So what did you read when you were young? What were the things that you were most attracted to? Was it just poetry, or did you read comics, or how
Well,
did you?
my parents, once again, in another possibly misguided move, to turn the garage into a double bedroom for myself and my little brother, and they put all their college textbooks in a bookshelf over my bed. Philosophy, poetry, and novels that they no longer had any interest in, but wouldn't throw out. So that became my library, and I read stuff. I'd read Aristotle or Sophocles, stuff that was way over my head, but I read it anyway, over and over. I mean, it was there for years. And then I still have 2 of those volumes. One is the works of Shakespeare in a red hardbound edition from the early 20th century. And the other is a book of romantic poetry and prose. And I consider them to be my father and my mother. And actually, one day I was in college down in Venice in an apartment, and I was reading that Shakespeare book. On the very first play is The Tempest, and I had never read it before. I came to Our revels now are ended. And I had a sort of visionary experience in that the page seemed to glow, and the words just struck into my soul. I in a flash understood what couldn't really be conveyed in language. That is, what is poetry, what poetry is, and how deep it can go. That speech from Shakespeare's Tempest. I was never the same after that. Now I knew what I was trying to do. That became clear, and I've since read everything he has written many times, or even might have written, or even stuff that he tagged onto other people's plays and so on. I'm still a student of his masterpieces.
Mm.
Yeah. very much a wordsmith, which brings me to words themselves. Like,
Yeah.
it's one thing to be a painter and to go into an art supply store and just pick out the colors that stand out to you or leap out to you or that you have in mind for a particular thing that you're envisioning. But with poetry, you're using words. So did you find yourself trying to pick up words or becoming fascinated with words because they would later maybe be used as tools in some sort of poetry that you were composing?
Sure, absolutely. Especially uh, as gloriously displayed in the works of the masters in prose and poetry. For example, Moby Dick, the language there, and your point is could not be more relevant in regards to me. Like if you ever go to the Museum of Modern Art in New York and look at the Starry Night by Van Gogh,
Mm-hmm.
It's different than seeing it in a book, to say the least.
For sure.
Totally.
They got the colors wrong, but it's not just that. It's the, what do they call it? Impasto. He actually lays the paint on with a knife,
Mm-hmm.
and then swirls it around with his brush, if not his hand.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that this is a man who loves paint,
Mm-hmm.
just paint, and also loves color and also loves shape and composition. And that is the way I hope somebody who reads my work comes away from reading it, thinking, this guy, whatever else, he may not have much to say, but he loves language. And so the meanings, the explicit dictionary meaning, I used to read the dictionary in answer to your question. Just read through the dictionary or my thesaurus, which I still have after all these years. Just reading that, swimming in the sea of language, and the locating words in their different contexts so that they take on other nuances.
Mm-hmm.
So that not just their explicit meaning. Mm-hmm.
Were you influenced by other art forms outside of music as you were developing your craft?
Hmm. I'd say eventually, yes. Both my first and my now current wife, current and permanent wife, just to be sure, so we can stay on the air, or are in the visual arts.
Mm.
Actually, I'm still dear friends with my first wife, and she's a great painter, and Laura is a fantastic photographer.
Wow.
And so that you would think that has some subterranean influence on me. I haven't really traced it, but I did know, like when I was writing Wyatt Earp as a sort of prose, as in prose poetry, let's say. Of course, Wyatt Earp is a major cultural figure, and a lot of people are familiar with him from things like the gunfight at the OK Corral, a 1950s movie.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, there's a number of movies, even more recent ones like Tombstone, that are quite good. And so I got on DVD like the top 10 Wyatt Earp films and watched them carefully. My Darling Clementine, that's another one.
Mhm.
And then if you then take that point of research and then look at the first page of Wyatt Earp, you say, well, this is a screen scenario
Mm.
in beautiful language, but come on, it's watching the sun descend on a hill, and then there's a distant tracking shot of a wagon going across the mesa, and the
Mhm.
whole thing. You can see the movie by reading that page. So yeah, that art form influenced me, and I think in a secret way, it's hard to exist as a writer without seeing and having seen all these movies. I love movies and I've seen zillions of them. How can that not influence your sense of where to cut and how to montage and things like that?
I was just thinking of our son as you were saying that our son is
Yeah,
interested in writing. I am a writer and
yeah.
have been since birth. As soon
I
as I
thought you were a muse.
That too.
well,
Oh, that too.
both.
Okay. All right.
So he said to me once when we were talking, like, I don't know how to write. Like, how do I do it? And I said, well, you love music and you love reading.
Yeah.
He's a voracious reader. And I said,
Yeah.
find a piece of music that you like and respond back to that.
Yeah.
So what I did was I love Pablo Neruda and I love Ana
Yes, me
Karenina.
too.
So I had a brief but tumultuous affair with Pablo Neruda's work. And the
Yeah.
way that I expressed that was that I wrote back to him. So he wrote a
Yeah.
a poem and I answered him back.
Yeah.
Did you ever
That's
find
beautiful.
thank you. Did you ever find that if you had some kind of a block or something that was preventing you from um, getting someplace that you needed to be, that there was some exercise or something that you could do that would help to maybe dislodge that block?
I'm a terrible person to ask that question. But let me back up and say that every great writer that I know of started the exact same way that you just described. That is, they take somebody they love, slavishly imitate them,
Mm-hmm.
um, and obviously come up with derivative work. And then they include a second influence that may not have much to do with the first, except the fact that they love them too.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's a bit of a mix.
Mm-hmm.
With Dylan, it's starting with Woody Guthrie, and then he incorporates Robert Johnson. That's not the same thing at all. Now
Right.
it's starting to feel a little Dylan-esque,
Mm-hmm.
right? And as he takes on more influences, and the same thing with Yeats or Shakespeare, who was idolizing Christopher Marlowe.
Mm.
Um, it's always the same that you the important thing is the passion for doing the work, and then eventually somebody finds their own voice normally and moves on from there. Now, what was the rest of the question? If a writer's block,
Yeah.
that only happened to me one time. And that is if you listen to Songs and Sonnets, there's I read at the Subterranean Poets Club in Willits, California, run by Robin Rule back in the 90s, about 1990, and read 32 sonnets to like every important literary figure in Northern California seemed to come to this thing. And I was really on, and I'd go up, and afterwards a woman came up and said, "Sounds like Gerard Manley Hopkins for the 20th century." And I about fell over, and I went back home to Portland and started to work on the next sonnet. And I thought, how would the great Larry Beckett write this? I was completely messed up. I had to actually just wait until I got a sense of my own humility again so I could work. So that dislodged me. But other than that, knock wood, I don't ever have writer's block and have no recommendations.
I love it. Do you have a specific one of my passions has been to talk to writers about their process. And every writer has a different process. For a time period, I worked for Irving Wallace's daughter, Amy Wallace. And Amy was also a writer. And she told me that the way Irving wrote is that he would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. He would start doing speed. He would do speed all day and write.
Speed. Oh boy, that's a hard life.
Okay. And then at 5 o'clock, it was cocktail time, and he would spend the rest of his night drinking. And so the writing was in that period when he was on speed in the daytime. So what's your process?
That's a Kerouac method too.
Yes.
Yeah. Hunter S. Thompson.
That got him going. Yeah. Hunter too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what are your drugs of choice?
What is your process?
No. Well, part of the process is this. John Keats, person I adore, and let's just say that he didn't live very long, and it really hurt him that he couldn't go on living. And I'll come back to the point in a minute, but I have a t-shirt that says, "But I digress." John Keats wrote the best ode in the English language called "Ode to a Nightingale," or possibly "To Autumn." And he also wrote the best short narrative poem, "The Eve of St. Agnes." And he also wrote the best song, "La Belle Dame Sans Merci." So that's an extraordinary record. No one else can say that. I mean, somebody else can maybe write the best sonnet or the best epic, but John Keats has 3 gold medals. The other thing that happened to John Keats is after his death, Gerard Hopkins became enamored, like I said, and slavishly imitated John Keats. So his first poems were like, if Keats had lived, what would he have done next? And as a matter of fact, you can extend that by saying, if Keats had lived, he most likely would have turned into Gerard Hopkins. And that the Wreck of the Deutschland and the Windhover and things like that are like later Keats. So in other words, Hopkins is living the life that was stolen from John Keats, living out that life. And what was the question?
What's your process? How do you?
Oh, the process. Okay, so the process is that normally I have different works of different lengths going at the same time. So I have a book of song lyrics, a book of sonnets, a book of madrigals, which are short, unrhymed poems,
Mm.
and and let's say a long narrative poem. And when John Keats said it, that's how he got into this. He said, if it had better come as naturally as the leaves on the trees, or not come at all.
Mm.
In other words, that you can't force literature. It has to pass through you onto the page. You're the conduit. I don't know where it comes from, but I know that just manufacturing something doesn't work. It has to come from someplace else. And staying in touch with that place and being open. And the reason I have 4 different kinds of poems is that it may be that I'm blocked, as you say. I don't have an idea for that song or that sonnet,
Mm-hmm.
or the narrative poem, but the madrigal, I've been having lines come to me. So that one is alive. So I just follow that. In other words, I make it just as easy as possible to follow inspiration. And that's something that I learned from Goethe, who also said you should write in the early morning, and which is called skimming the cream, and you leave the cheese for everybody else. And the other thing I learned was from Hemingway, who said you're writing along, you shouldn't put the last part of your inspiration down that day. Leave that to get you going the next day. So there's a trigger there that I found to be really good advice. But the process for me is it's hard for me to describe. It's sort of inchoate. It can really vary. For a sonnet or an ode, I might start to get phrases. I don't even know how they're all going to go together, and I just put them out on a page like some Apollinaire poem, which some people would probably like better than the finished sonnet, but they can go to hell. So, and then sometimes, especially in recent years, the process has become really absurd. I mean, like, for example, I was reading my morning poetry, an anthology of modern American poetry, a really big one. And I happened to be reading a poet that I really loathe. But I'm not going to not read it. I'm going to be familiar enough so that I can criticize them with some authority. And I'm reading along, and suddenly an entire song came to me, 4 verses. And I thought, wow, that feels good. And pulled out my handy notebook of song lyrics, opened to a blank page, and wrote it all out. What kind of a process is that? But that's what happened. I can show you the page. That I didn't cross anything out. It came to me perfect as itself. I don't know what that is. I've made myself available to the angels who are whispering in my ear.
Which leads to something that I wanted to ask you. Is poetry for you maybe more of a spiritual pursuit or an intellectual pursuit? or a little bit of both?
Poetry,
Yes.
it's a sensual pursuit.
Sensual pursuit.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of involvement with philosophy or intellect. Though I'm sure that you'll say I'm scholarly. I mean, I wrote beat poetry and a book of criticism. But when it comes to creating, I'm concerned with the life of the senses and the sensuality of the language and the sensation of the music. I I I think that when poetry becomes philosophical, that what you wind up at the end of a poet's philosophical writing career is a kind of half-assed philosophy. It's not coherent. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and an end. It doesn't have lines of vectors of force between the different elements. It's just, this tidbit of philosophy and that tidbit of philosophy. What good is that to anyone? What we need is being in nothingness, where you actually lay it down. And that's not a poem. So I don't even know. Not only that, but and here I'm just going to become completely naked. But I have a hard time with the idea that the universe has a meaning or life has a meaning. It seems to me that people, by and large, crave meaning, and they are apparently heartlessly placed into a universe that has none. So therein lies a problem. That's why there are cults, so you can surrender yourself to somebody who will deliver meaning. So I try to write poetry, and it sounds like it's saying something, but then when you look at it very closely, you realize, well, he's not saying anything. He's not teaching me anything about anything. There's no morals. There's nothing didactic. There's not enough philosophy. I quote philosophers like Camus, but that just means I was reading a Camus in the back seat of the car as we rolled across the U.S. And the thing is, I think that a meaning would make the universe smaller. I like the vastness of and the fact that it's unknown, and really ultimately life is mysterious. Life is mystery. It's the mystery. And I found that in the works of Eugenio Montale, the Italian poet, and Fujiwara Shunzei, the Japanese poet, early on, and devoted myself not to philosophy, but to mystery, to convey the mystery of living. And it may be that I may not get very famous because people are craving meaning and they can go somewhere else and find it. But my hope is that in 500 years, that everybody will be like me from California and not care whether there's a meaning or not, one way or the other, and love my poetry.
I don't think you have to wait 500 years for that.
And the thing is that in answer to the other half of your question, is that, how can I put this? I looked around, I'm reading Homer, I'm reading Dante, I'm reading these epic poets, and I'm looking around for the American epic.
Mm.
I mean, what a country, what a history, what amazing folklore and folk songs.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Shenandoah and John Henry and all that
Yeah.
stuff that I read about when I was little, and learned those songs I learned, and I didn't see it. I mean, there's, Longfellow tried, but Hiawatha, it's in some verse meter that he learned from a Finnish epic. It's not really American enough for it to be a Native American poem. And then there's the bridge, which is often considered to be a flawed masterpiece, but it's not really it's really intensive, not extensive. It's lyric poetry at a high degree of compression, but the stories aren't there. And there's some amazing stories in the American universe. So I thought, maybe it's up to me. Maybe it's up to me to write the American epic. But in order to do that, I had to divorce myself from my leaning towards being an intellectual. Because this country is not an intellectual country. So I don't think an intellectual sitting down to write the American epic is going to have a very smooth ride. Mm-hmm. It's not actually going to happen at all. No one will read it. It's like Ezra Pound, really, the cantos, really? No one wants to read that stuff anymore. He himself admitted it was rags and patches at the end of his life. It was a miserable failure. There's an intellectual writing an epic. Mm. And it's not going to happen. And so I wanted to incorporate the anti-intellectual into my framework, into my being. So to that end, also, if you pick up American Poetry Review and say, look at this poem, don't look at the poems, look at who wrote them. They're all professors, almost every one. They're a professor. But a professor means you're not making very much money. Mm-hmm. You can't really travel that much unless you get a Guggenheim. Yeah. And and then you have to do what the idiot head of the department heads tells you to. Mm-hmm. If you can't decide that you're not going to give out grades. You can't decide, what is all right to read out loud in class and what's banned. You don't make those decisions. Your soul is not your own. Mm-hmm. But I don't think you can write the American epic if your soul is not your own. So as a result, I dropped out of UCLA and never became a professor. I was still trying to work in the American heart. Mm-hmm. And to write the epic that had never been written. It took 57 years. And that's American cycle. But it's not intellectual, and it's not anything a professor would say.
No, it's plain song, and it's beautifully written.
Thank you.
Do you know David Swanger? The writer?
No.
He wrote What the Wing Says.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard that.
I will have to send you this poem. It's
great.
It's up there. It's something that I think you and Laura would both really enjoy. If you had to narrow it, what I love about you, Larry, is that you're not kind of stuck in one place in the poetry world. Like you'll hear people and they only like a specific type of poetry or will only read a specific type of poetry, but your tastes really run the gamut. So this may be a very difficult question, but if you could say whatever your top few writers would be. You mentioned Keats, you mentioned Shakespeare.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's pretty easy. And we're just talking about poets now, and we're talking about world poets.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say Homer, Ovid, Li Po, and Li Shangyin, Basho, Dante, Goethe, Rimbaud,
Yes.
Montali, and Hart Crane. That got him, and William Shakespeare, of course.
Mm-hmm.
No beats in there.
Yeah, I'm not putting them in the top 10.
Sure.
I love the poetry of Ginsberg and Kerouac, however, and Corso, and well, all of them actually, but those three especially. Mm-hmm.
What did you think of Howl?
Hit me like a ton of bricks. Actually, after I read it, I recently in LA got a copy of the book that exposed me to it. Those were the days. It was like around 1960. I'm wandering around in a supermarket. There's an anthology called The Beat Generation and the Angry Young Men, and in there, and I thought, oh, I'm angry. I could relate. And there was a slightly censored version, but complete, otherwise complete, copy of Howl, and also a chapter from On the Road. Mm-hmm. I was never the same after that. I started to write free association poetry every day in class rather than study. It turned out all right, but yeah.
Did you ever participate in the beat movement? Or I know you've documented it and you've critiqued it, but did you ever feel like you were a part of that?
Very much so. Like I say, what really kicked me off writing poetry, though I'd been doing sort of literary things before that, was Ginsberg's Howl. And the beats were a nice anti-intellectual movement too, that appealed to me on some deep level. I'm sorry, what was the rest of the question?
Did you feel like you were a part of that movement?
Oh, I prayed that anybody would ever consider me a part of the beat movement. I would embrace it. Actually, the beat poets themselves are just pissed off. I wrote this book, Beat Poetry, and I sent it to Ferlinghetti and McClure and Snyder and so on. And they don't want to be known as beat poets. They think it's categorization.
Yeah.
And I fully understand that they don't want to be limited by whatever is called beat poetry. But beat poetry is really almost a geographical term initially about the poets that congregated in San Francisco in the 50s. And then as I wrote it, I found a definition of beat by Kerouac, down and out, but full of a passionate intensity. that seemed to apply to all these poets. And I'm sure that if you went to Snyder and said, if I call this beat, if I define beat like Kerouac did, would you call yourself a beat? He'd say yes.
Mm.
So the book was a kind of a revelation to me in defining the beats. But I love the beats so much. And I did have two-way conversation with the last of the baby beats, and that is David Meltzer. And you know, I asked him, I was confirming the address he was living in when he wrote one of his books.
Mm-hmm.
So that by that he knew I was really doing my homework. And so we had a really blissful correspondence for a couple of years after that. And if someone would come along and say, yes, he's really, and especially on the strength of beat poetry, a post beat, I would absolutely be in ecstasy. Love those guys.
Mm.
Have you heard or come across I believe it's a 3 or 4 CD box set by Rhino called The Beat Generation?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have, it has a little too, well, I don't know if it's the one with the pop stuff. There's one that came out that had only poetry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is not it.
Yeah, that one I have. The Rhino one is a bit too poppy for me.
Yeah, sure.
I've heard all this stuff on it. I don't
Yes.
need to have the CD necessarily.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do have a vast archive. I have David Meltzer reading live in L.A., produced by the Birds producer.
Oh, nice.
Things like that, things that nobody has, I've got. So my audio collection can't be beat.
Fantastic. Do you have it?
Do
you have it digitized and backed up?
No.
Okay.
And I should. These are single copies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And get it out there. Expose
True.
it. Yeah. So
yeah.
If something should happen.
But one of the great things about the beats and it's a good thing we got on this, because I noticed that there was at some point at the birth of the vision of what would become American Cycle, and I felt my way along its composition. I didn't have the whole thing mapped out. I knew I was going to work on Paul Bunyan.
Mm-hmm.
That's all, and possibly something else if I got there. But my heroes were at that point were Shakespeare, Joyce,
mm-hmm.
and Ginsberg. And there's something in common with those people, and that is what we call orality. That is part of the way to convey the beauty of language, and to convey the music of language is to read it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And I was profoundly influenced in this by the recordings of Ken Nordine.
Yes,
the sort of prose poet from Chicago. He was everything but beat. He just was in the wrong place at the right time. But I have just about everything he ever recorded.
Cool.
Have memorized it and can recite it to you. So he was a living example of how beautiful language can be when it's written with an ear to the sound and a love for the language itself, its nuances. And then Shakespeare, of course, was written to be acted on stage and spoken by actors, including himself.
Mm-hmm.
And James Joyce, my favorite James Joyce was the Anna Livia Pluribel part of Finnegan's Wake,
Mm-hmm.
and that is two washerwomen gossiping late in the early evening, and it's all speech. It's all derived. It's all inspired by their kind of talk.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ginsberg, of course, as soon as only a couple of years after publishing Howl, came out with an album of him reciting it, also in Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
brilliantly. So that made me think that publishing was reading out loud.
Mm.
And, I'm writing some sort of postmodern, challenging, long narratives completely obsolete form. Nobody's writing it anymore. And I'm sure editors would just raise their eyebrow while sending me the rejection slip, going, boy, are you misguided. But I don't go by literary fashion. I go by what I'm passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
So there.
Well, you mentioned
So it has to be read out loud. And actually, I'll finish by saying
mm-hmm.
that the entire American Psycho, I hired a guy that I got from I went to a Baroque music concert, saw the sound guy. He looked pretty hip. I said, can you do a sound of just me reading? And so I would perform. Once I'd finished a new book in the American Cycle, I would perform it to an invited audience,
mm-hmm.
and have this guy record it on, with professional sound. Nice. And all of those recordings are now available wherever and on all streaming services around the world.
Nice.
Amazing.
Yeah, so you just type in Larry Beckett or American Psycho or Paul Bunyan, or it's all live performances with the audience. Cool. Of the complete piece. So wow. the entire 750-page book is online.
Amazing.
That's fantastic. Well, speaking of Joyce, and obviously we're talking about language. What are your thoughts about invented language? Joyce's books are filled with words that, are just sort of phonetically playful, but somehow they still convey a meaning. Maybe not a meaning that we're used to, but so what are your ideas, or what are your thoughts about that?
Invented language?
Yeah.
He does it spectacularly in Finnegan's Wake, and comes up with new compounds, I think, in Ulysses. I think I have problems with those books as works of art, mm-hmm. but technically they are inspiring, and getting into the roots of words. It's just more in the etymology. It's just more exploration of language itself. So those things are, and he foregrounds those, as you say, and that is inspiring.
Have you seen this book?
What is that?
Poetry Speaks.
Oh, of course I have it, and all I've just got through. I'll tell you one thing. That not only did I just finish listening to it.
You did.
Every Friday night I listen to spoken word for 20 minutes.
Cool.
This is another great one.
It's not a lot, but yeah. But I felt that some pieces were left out of Poetry Speaks that should have been included. So I made a 4th CD of myself. I burned it myself.
No kidding. That's amazing. I'd love to hear
and
it.
Ends with Ken Nordine and Dylan.
Oh.
but starts with some Yeats that they foolishly left out. Come on, you got to include everything of Yeats that survives.
I just
Yeah.
love that James Joyce is on this and
Yes.
Walt Whitman
Reading.
speaking.
Yeah, that is Whitman.
Yeah.
And yeah, Joyce reading from Anna Livia Pluribel.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I've never asked anyone to do this before, and you could obviously refuse. Um, but I've never heard someone read Song to the Siren. I've never heard it read
Oh,
like it's
yeah, I'd be
supposed to
happy
be.
to.
I would love to hear it from you.
Sure. I have a recording also that came out, and I'll send you the link.
Okay.
Um, of an album that I recorded. Oh, this is a strange story, but we have 7 minutes left. I recorded. It's called Last Session at Studio B,
Mm-hmm.
and it turned out now Jerry Esther, his day job was engineer at Annex Studios down
Mm-hmm.
on Santa Monica, and he would just do anything, transfer from master to cassettes, and might be there's a session, and he learned to engineer from Elvis Presley's engineer. That was Elvis Presley's old studio.
Mm-hmm.
Used to be called Radio Recorders. Didn't used to be called Studio One, used to be called Studio B.
Mm-hmm.
The piano was still there. The microphone was still there. The board was still there.
Wow.
The echo chamber was still there.
Mm-hmm.
Artifact.
Everything was there from the days in the late 50s when Elvis was there.
Mm-hmm.
And they went out of business. And it was the last night. The next morning, they were going to come in and sell the piano at auction and take apart the studio and destroy it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And he said, "You want to go in, and you have any new songs?" And I said, "Yes, I have new songs." And so we went into the studio at about 2:30 in the morning, and I recorded an album. And the thing of it is that, and this album ends with me singing Siren.
Wow.
But the thing of it is that much as I love Elvis and even love Lieber and Stoller, I felt that Elvis brought a sense of sexuality and the joy of sexuality to music.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they censored One Night of Sin and said, "You can't put that out, it's too erotic."
Mm-hmm.
He then did an even more erotic version of the same song with new lyrics, "One Night with You." But he's growling all the way through it. And you're going, wow, how'd this get on the radio? And so he found a way to communicate, but I thought that the language wasn't liberated.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd worked for years on trying to fine tune language so that it could convey eroticism without being pornographic or funny.
Mm-hmm.
Not easy, not
Right.
easy. And there's 3 songs on here where I try to make rock and roll as erotic in the language as it is in the music.
I love it.
And this is all on Last Session at Studio B, which you can also find and purchase on any music streaming service.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Okay, but here we go. Song to the Siren. Long afloat on shipless oceans, I did all my best to smile, till your singing eyes and fingers drew me, loving, to your isle. And you sang, "Sail to me, sail to me, let me enfold you. Here I am, waiting to hold you." Did I dream you dreamt about me? Were you hare when I was fox? Now my foolish boat is leaning, broken, lovelorn on your rocks. For you sing, touch me not, touch me not, come back tomorrow. Oh, my heart shies from the sorrow. I am puzzled as the oyster. I am troubled as the tide. Should I stand amid the breakers? Should I lie with death, my bride? Hear me sing. Swim to me. Swim to me. Let me enfold you. Here I am. Here I am, waiting to hold you.
That was really beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks so much. That's a first.
I've waited 40 years for that moment.
Oh, well, all right.
um, thank you, Larry, so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, it's
and
been
Hunter.
Wonderful to get to know you. And
yeah,
if there's any place that you would like the listeners or the viewers to go, do you have stuff online? Do you have a website?
I do have a website, and I've got plenty of links that I can send your way.
Fantastic. Well, we'll just direct them towards the episode notes then.
Yeah, beautiful.
Okay. Yeah, as opposed to reading.
It's a wonderful talking to you. Thank you. So many really salient questions.
Well, that's definitely a compliment coming from you. Wordsmith that you are.
All right.
It has been an honor and a pleasure to meet you, Larry.
Absolutely.
I truly appreciate you and all of your work. And I thank you, and I thank your beautiful wife, Laura, for connecting us. She is the connective tissue, and I just really appreciate her. So thank both.
Thanks so much, and I hope we can get closer in the future.
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
Please.
And I will let you know when this comes out, and I can send you the links, and you can put it wherever you feel appropriate.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, Larry.
And all right. Liz Fraser, we are sending a call out to you.
Yeah, anytime.
All right, take care. Many blessings.
Yeah.
Okay, same to you.
All right.
Thank you.
Farewell, friend.
That was as moving and powerful as I hoped and intended that it would be. And the fact that Larry was so generous with his time and so willing to read Song to the Siren was really, really incredible. And that was hearing words written by someone in the tone and in the meter that they're supposed to be read is just brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. In a different sort of vibe for the melt. If there can be if we have a lane that we stay in, which I would like to think that we do not, but it was funny when we first joined him on Zoom, he was like, are you sure you guys, are you sure I belong here? But he most certainly has. If anything, as a piece of history, a piece of our personal history, a piece of musical history, a piece of poetic history, who is still in the present. History doesn't have to be past tense. It's still with us. And as testament to the Kitty Macfarlane version, people are still interpreting his words because they're that important. They're timeless, absolutely timeless. So you can never read those words and go, oh, that's so 1970s or
Mhm.
so whatever. Like that just, it could have been from,
Ovid.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah.
I must say, what I was going to say to him when he said that was, uh, on this show, I have suggested a total. I think we're nearly 200 shows. We're close. We're kind of in the
We're the episode that's coming out this week is 220.
okay. So that tells you how keyed in I am.
And there's also Patreon only episodes, and we're up to almost 20 with that too. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So out of all of those episodes, I have reached out to three people and asked three people to be on the show: Dr. Danielle Canafo, Dr. Amon Hillman, and Larry Beckett, which is a very strange trifecta when you consider how very different all three of those people are.
Two doctors and a poet.
Two doctors and a poet walk into the melt. And so that's what I was going to say, was that on some level, this was a curated show selfishly for me, because I really feel so moved by his work. And when I initially started to do the research about Song to the Siren, and I found that he had written the song, that Buckley had written the music, but that Larry Beckett had written the lyrics, what I was most compelled by was not the melody, it was the lyrics. So when I found out he was still alive, it was like, what do I have to do? Who do I have to talk to talk to this person? Because I think it's easy to focus, and I wanted to say that to him, is that it's easy to focus on the sexy dead guy, the sexy dead poet, or the sexy dead rock star, or whatever, because we can unpack all of our hopes and dreams on someone that doesn't challenge us because they're not alive. And so to talk to someone who has really seen these crucial moments in history and been a part of those crucial moments in history, and he's still alive, and he has all of his faculties, and he's sane and kind
And lovely.
and
Yeah.
lovely and an open person, you know, that may not be sexy to some people because it's not as romantic as the starving artist or the tortured poet. So to see someone so wholly well rounded and just earnest and genuine and just so sweet was just really refreshing.
I agree. Then we got into the conversation about artists as assholes. You know, like it's a fine line between being a nutcake and being a very creative person. I think because creative people are sensitive people and they are observant in a way, and they feel a little uh, on the outside, so they have an vantage point that most people don't have, and that can drive you nuts. That can drive you crazy when you have a hard time finding like-minded people or kindred spirits or whatever. So it can be very lonely, and that can be maddening, or it can lead to self-destruction. And then bring into that, as I was saying, the stereotypes of the self-destructive suffering artist, which is total bullshit. But I understand why it exists. I think I tried to I tried to do that myself. I didn't feel like I wasn't a sufferer. I had it pretty fucking easy in my childhood. Didn't have any major abuse or anything like that. So I think I tried to emulate that, as stupid as that sounds. And in hindsight, is how ridiculous. But I think I was wanting that passion that I didn't feel. I felt very relatively centered in comparison to some people who I idolized, like Jim Morrison or
Yeah.
Bukowski or whatever. But anyway, so I found it also very refreshing to meet somebody who puts out fantastic stuff, writes incredible things, and is a wonderful, centered, grounded, decent human being. I really love that.
Yeah, I think that that the challenge that I have observed in the any type of creative arts world is that there seems to be this need or this desire to elevate mediocrity and to kind of lower the bar as far as we possibly can, uh, if it monetizes creativity. And I really abhor that, and I find that gross. And so I think as a writer of any writer, if you're writing songs or you're writing poetry and you see someone that maybe doesn't necessarily have the skill or the talent of writing, but is being packaged as a performer and then is given these songs to spit out, it's easy to get disenchanted by that and feel very discouraged by that, because you're not seeing people who are creating art, who are making art, who are artists. It's this very manufactured version of something, so it becomes a commodity. And with someone like Larry, it seems to be, and I don't know him well enough to really speak to this, but it seems to be that he had a fairly consistent or steady life while all of this other chaos was going on around him, and that some people got wrapped up in their own mythos of their own chaos, and that is where the self-destructive aspect of creativity comes in, because you do have people who have deep trauma and are really fucked up, and instead of those people being supported to get better, it's almost like, let's keep you mired in your shit so you can keep producing tortured or tormented work. And I think that that is has a very short shelf life, and I think that that's why a lot of these people burn out very quickly, because you have to have a certain level of, when I say sobriety, I'm not talking about drugs and alcohol. I mean like mental clarity. You have to have a degree of that in order to produce work. So the idea that you have to be fucked up, or you have to be in pain, or you have to be angry to make good art, I think is completely an overblown concept.
Yeah, where's Lydia Lunch now? She put out a poetry book since 1983. Like, it's just because that can only go so far, and then you become a parody of yourself. If your poetry um, becomes too self-absorbed. I don't remember how it was put, what the exact terminology was, but when I first started listening to podcasts way back when, before you and I met, um, somebody put forth the concept of music, different types of music. There's music for the person who's making it, and there's music for everybody else, music that people make for everybody else. The Beatles make music for everybody. Um, Whereas somebody like Sarah McLachlan, maybe, or I don't know, I get it's not a good example because I'm not that familiar with her work, but Alanis Morissette, um, are very self-absorbed, almost narcissistic ways of expressing. They're expressing their whatever, their inner stuff that is so personal to them that it's almost hard to relate to because you're not sure what they're referring to or what they're talking about. But Larry doesn't seem to be that kind of a poet. Haven't read much of his stuff, but um, he comes forth as somebody who is writing poems for everybody. Like, he's sharing the wealth of his creativity and his expression. He's not writing things that are so personal that nobody can ever see themselves in that. And I think that's it's hard to have a voice and publish and release things publicly and keep that door open for people to walk through.
Yeah, it's not self-congratulatory
Yeah.
or narcissistic or self-effacing. It there is a chronological development of his work. So with every thing that I've read, it seems to evolve even more with the next piece. And I think that that is a the mark of someone who is truly a writer or in any craft. If you by the fourth album, if your fourth album still sounds like your first album or your second album or your third album, then maybe you're not growing as an artist. And what I see and what Larry has done is Larry has pushed himself out of his comfort zone consistently. And maybe that does come from suffering. But maybe that is a way of evolving through that suffering as opposed to being mired in it and getting stuck in one spot and just calcifying in that place.
Yeah, I think art inspired by incidental suffering, your circumstantial suffering is different than perpetuating your suffering, like making your own life miserable and self-sabotaging, like he was talking about Tim doing. I'm not saying that this is the reason Tim did it, but just to keep that ball rolling so that you have some sort of tension from which your art derives. And I don't see that coming from Larry at all.
Yeah, when you look at as he was describing Van Gogh and the Starry Night, I've seen that painting. It's one of the pieces that I always would go to when I would go to MoMA. But the thing that I notice about that is exactly what he was saying: is that Van Gogh was in love with paint. He was obsessed with the medium, so he ate it. He embodied it. It wasn't just this disconnected relationship. It was he was the paint. He became the canvas. He involved himself and his own alchemy in the work, and so you feel that when you stand in front of that piece. So it's you could say that about food or anything that someone has been intentional about. If I go to a 7-star restaurant, it's going to be a wholly different experience than if I go to In and Out. They're both food, but one has an intent behind it that maybe will carry with me in a different way. And I feel that way with his work. What am curious about, and I would love to continue this conversation with him, is okay, if people shouldn't become poets, and I know he's saying that kind of tongue in cheek because there's so many poets, how is it that we evolve this form of art?
Can I interject? I think that we have lost. I shouldn't say that we have lost. Um, it probably goes on all the time, constantly. Uh, that people live artful lives, and they don't have to document it. They don't have to have a vlog
Mm-hmm.
or make a series of paintings or constantly publish books. They do it in their everyday existence by the way that they make their food, the way that they maybe grow their food, the way
Mm-hmm.
that they interact with each other and the world around them. So I think that it's easy to sort of project one's expressions out um, for all to see, and in a context where it's understood that this is this, and so I'm going to publish this thing and put it out for you to read, and you know that that is a book of poetry and that it has serves a certain purpose. Maybe you read it when you feel melancholy, or you read it when you feel, depending on what it is that you're reading. Whereas it's not as tangible to, like I said, live an artful life where everything you put the same uh, degree of nuance and creativity and detail into interacting internally and externally with things instead of documenting. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that that goes back to that old meme, that famous meme. So many selfies, so little self or self-reflection.
Mhm.
So I think that there's an age or an era of that I think people have gotten swept up in the past 20 years or so. But I think the evolution of that is what we've seen with our son, for example, who now is carrying around a cassette player in his car to listen to music and likes records and is collecting old electronics and old gear, because I think that there's a soullessness to something that is intangible, where there is something soulful about something that's tangible. So we want these things that we can kind of hold on to. And art is something that is so transient that you can't necessarily hold on to it. You can't get a grip of it. So there's no formula that Larry could say, okay, this is how you become a poet, or this is how you become a songwriter, or whatever. Like, that's not how you write Song to the Siren. So that may be how you write a jingle to sell laundry detergent or something, but something that's really going to move people, I think, takes more depth than that. And I think we are getting the way the pendulum is swinging now is that there are people who are looking for more depth in more tangible ways. So they're going back and they're reading poetry, or they're going and looking at old art, or trying to interpret old text, because I think we know when we've hit that wall where it's like, okay, we're not growing anymore. So sometimes it takes looking back at other art to actually become engaged or reinvigorated.
Yeah, and I think we get caught up in the concept that if we make music or we write poetry or we paint paintings, that and I'm guilty of doing this with our oldest son, um, that it has to be, or it should, we're encouraged to display it publicly,
Yeah,
as opposed to just,
make it.
well, not only make it, but, or not just make it, but display it in your own house. Just hang it up and decorate your own existence with that. Like, there's a lot of difference between a uh, recording artist who signs a 10 album contract and the outsider art dude who lives in a town with less than 500 people, whose yard is full of shit that he makes because he enjoys making it, you know?
Yeah.
The expression, the process, not the product. Um, so back to your so many selfies, so little self. I think that we have so many ways to document things, or to put our stamp on things, that we sort of lose track of, okay, we can document any moment in time right now, whether it be video or photo or whatever, but is it all worth documenting? Like, well, maybe we should be concentrating more on the content as opposed to the product that derives from that content.
Well, in your defense, I will say uh, that one of the reasons that you would probably encourage our son to display his art or have an exhibit or anything is pride, because you're proud of what
Sure.
he's created,
Yeah.
because he's created some really amazing stuff. And, his room is messy, as teenagers' rooms are messy. And you don't want those things to get lost or destroyed or forgotten or somehow dismissed. And so I think the pride as a parent is seeing someone that you love take basically trash and then create something that's a treasure and make something beautiful out of that. You want to celebrate that. So I understand that. But I also understand his not necessarily feeling that right now, like that he might not have enough stuff to feel ready to do that. So I see both sides.
On the other hand, I think that there are benefits to releasing things that we create publicly because it can help us connect with other people. Whether it be somebody hears something that you made or see something that you made and then they go, "Oh my God, I felt that all my life, but I've never been able to put it into words, much less make a song out of it or something." So I think it can, in its highest purpose, can help people to feel less alone and like there's other people out there that are sharing their experience or similar experiences to what they experienced and thought was their own sort of internal neurotic existence. So it can serve that purpose, like this podcast. It's funny, we should talk about all this, and we're putting out a podcast to release. Although sometimes I'm like, should we? But hopefully, on its highest level, it can serve to not only maybe get people's minds working or help them feel less alone, but in lighten loads a little bit, or to maybe help us all refine our way that we're interacting with each other in the world. So yeah, it's not so easy, I guess, to demonize something when it can be used like anything for something constructive or something that isn't necessarily productive.
When he was talking about Buckley and doing a show and how Buckley would respond to praise and criticism, the first thing I thought of just momentarily was years ago I was working with a Hasid and I said something about, oh, I like your hat or whatever, your curls, or I gave him some compliment. And he looked at me dead in the eye and he said, um, just so you know something about my people, like we don't accept compliments. We don't trust people who give us compliments because we think they're trying to pull the wool over our eyes or get something out of us. And when he was describing Buckley, I was thinking that. I was thinking, Buckley in his way, and I literally know nothing about this person, and I'm just spitballing here when I'm saying this, but it almost sounded like he was suspicious of someone who was complimenting him or praising him after a show because of his own insecurities and his own self-doubt. And so when someone said something positive, instead of accepting that, it's like looking at that person and going, you're fucked or crazy, or you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Where if someone came up and said, criticized him, it's like, oh, well, I'm home. Like this, I recognize this feeling of it wasn't good enough or I'm not good enough. So I think that can keep you in that place of maybe second guessing the art if you need that. So if you need someone to tell you it's great or you need someone to tell you it sucks, then that can inform how you create something. Where if you're just creating it because your soul needs to speak or something needs to get out of you, then I think it's easier to be distanced from that.
I agree. I don't really have anything to add to that, but should we let these lovely people go? We've been almost going on for a half hour. So.
Let's do it.
Do you have anything else to say? Well, geez, I forgot to turn that notification off. I'm glad that it just happened now.
I know.
That's all I got. Thank you all so much for listening or watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as we did. Can you take this up? I need to wet my whistle.
I am a hunter. This is Chris. If you want to reach Chris, you can get
late
him
for all that
at themelt@protonmail.com, or you can reach me at hunter-muse@protonmail.com.
Yes, we welcome interaction and yeah, lots of fantastic stuff coming. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you were able to glean something positive from this.
Yes. And if you are a patron, which you probably are, if you've made it 26 minutes into this dialogue, and you are interested in a free goodie, we have a giant stack of books that we would love to share with you. So just send us a little note and we'll send something out to you. We'll send you a picture and then you can pick what book you would like.
And everybody gits to listen to the After Babble. So
Yeah,
it's not just Patreon.
Well, maybe if you send me an email, I'll send you something, even if you're not a patron. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, yeah, we've got books, but we also have this old cryptid poster that we've had for a while that I've been wanting to give away. We got two. Remember, we ordered Arvo one, and we got two. So I've got one in my closet that I've had forever that I'd love to send you guys. So reach out. We love you. We're here.
Take care, all. Until next time.
Meow.